Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Bruce Sellery, and I am the president of the Canadian Club of Toronto. Today, our focus is on food security, something that most of us really don't give a whole lot of thought about, except for maybe how do we ensure that the Girl Guide cookies we are hiding in the cupboard will not be consumed by the rest of the family? That has been to the extent of which we think about the security of food in our own household. And when we go to grocery stores, historically, most of us haven't been that engaged in the question. It's about the price of the cauliflower or where we find the seaweed for the DIY sushi, right? Everything has changed since the beginning of this new world that we find ourselves in. It is a very, very different world. I arrive at that grocery store so grateful that it is open, so grateful that it is abundantly stocked, and so grateful to the staff that are there doing what I think we've now deemed to be an essential service. So it's a really very different perspective. I have largely been stoic about the pandemic, but if there is one place that I'm going to have an ugly cry, it is going to be in the parking lot of a grocery store. Because I sometimes just get overwhelmed by the situation we're in and the people who are serving us, so we ensure that our families have food to eat. Also, left to our own devices, most of us would end up with basil that looks something like this, which is kind of horrifying to think if I really had to grow my own food, how that would go for me and for others. These questions about food security are ones that the general public has been ignoring for ages, but the industry hasn't been. And so that is the focus of our conversation. We have gathered a panel of experts to talk about the current state of Canada's food supply system, what has been learned so far during this pandemic, and also what the future looks like post-COVID-19. Before we dive into today's topic, let me tell you a few things about the web page you are on. In particular, the button that says click here to switch stream. So if you're finding that the feed is a little bit low, you can press that button. The video quality may decrease, but the audio quality will remain the same. Second is the questions tab. So we would love to hear from you and include your questions in the conversation. Just click on that little window, type in your question, and it will be sent directly to our moderator. The request help button is for technical questions if you're having trouble making all this work logistically. Now, to introduce our panelists. Danielle Barran is the president of McCain Foods Canada. Garnet Lasby is the president of Massilly North America, the packaging company. Cathy, Lennon is the general manager of the Ontario Federation of Agriculture. And today's moderator is Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, professor of food distribution and policy at Dalhousie University. Unfortunately, Nilam Ganenthiran from Instacart was unable to join us today. Now, one of the club's traditions that has not changed in this virtual world is the toast we make to our country. Usually it's done in person, but I'd ask all of us, our panelists, and those of you at home, if you have a glass sitting around, to raise a glass with a toast to Canada. To Canada.
To Canada.
Canada. Dr. Charlebois, I turn the Canadian Club's podium over to you.
Well, thank you, Bruce. Thank you for the introduction. I want to thank the Canadian Club for looking into food for the second time this year. It's such an important topic, obviously. And given what we've gone through over the last 8 weeks, I think it's fair to say that a lot of Canadians have put a lot of thought into food generally, where it comes from. Before the pandemic started back in March, terms we were hearing a lot were plant-based, sustainability, single-use plastics. We barely hear these terms anymore. Now we're hearing more terms like shelves, supply chain, and in terms of processing, and we talk about production as well. Today's panel is going to look into the unknown, the hidden aspect of food systems. We all go to the grocery store. We used to go to restaurants a lot, not anymore, unfortunately, for the next little while. So we're exposed to that dimension of food systems, but we've never really thought much about what's on the other side, out there, upstream. And so today we have three wonderful guests joining us today to talk about that aspect of food systems. So I'll ask each and every one of them to talk a little bit what they do in their business and or who they represent. And of course, I'd love to hear from them about what they've seen so far during this crisis. And so I'll start with Cathy, Cathy Lennon from GM from CFA. And so you can start with Cathy, and then we'll move on to other guests.
Sure. So I'm actually General Manager of Ontario Federation of Agriculture, not CFA, but definitely connected nationally with that group as well. Sorry, Sylvain. What have we seen? Well, certainly, I think you're right. The food system from field to fork is something that we involved in the industry have been thinking about for a long time on a daily basis. But for many people, it has been like breathing. Until you can't breathe, you don't think about it. And so now we've seen people getting up and going to the grocery store, seeing occasions when the products or the size of the product or the variety of the product that they are regular shoppers for is not available. For us at OFA, we certainly have learned a lot too, and spoken to a number of farmers all across the province and across the country who are experiencing challenges that they never anticipated. So the loss of the food service market is a significant one. If you think about chicken wings and French fries and beverages, many foods that are very regularly burgers, things that are often prepared and served in food service, that disappeared overnight. So a number of people lost a significant piece of their market. Labor has been another really big struggle for agriculture across the country. So you first heard about it in fruit and vegetable farming, as they rely a lot on a foreign agriculture essential workforce to assist in the whole scheme of planting through to harvesting. And there was interruption in the availability and supply of labor.
All right. Thank you, Cathy. I'll ask Garnet now to explain a little bit what he does and what he's seen so far during this crisis.
Thanks, Sylvain. Well, what we do at Massilly is manufacture what we used to consider the least important part of a specific process in the food industry. We make the metal cap. We don't make one, we make hundreds of billions of metal caps that go on glass jars. So the easiest example currently is something that I'm sure none of us have gone to the grocery store to stockpile since this thing started, pasta sauce. So we are, although unimportant in the grand scheme of things, we became an essential service very quickly. Cathy mentioned the food service industry shut down, and we all saw retail grocery become an essential service. At the same time, there's a whole bunch of elements of the food processing sector that most people don't think about, such as the metal cap, that are absolutely critical to having preserved and shelf-stable foods, which became very much more important and visible overnight. So we all prefer fresh, that's fantastic, but fresh tomatoes don't last as long as tomato sauce in a jar. So we are a critical element of that most people don't think of. You take that lid, you take it off, you throw it in recycling. I hope it is recyclable. And you think about the pasta sauce, you think about the brand, but you don't think about the fact that if it isn't closed, it's going to rot. And it won't last the 6 to 12 to 24 to 36 months in your basement that we're hoping that the cases and cases of those products will last, that I'm sure none of us bought when we were not stockpiling. So we've become very much an essential service. We're still operating. What we have seen is we're an outlier. We're running beyond our capacity. A shout out to everybody in that food supply and processing packaging chain. Our customers are all very busy. When food service shut down, retail demand went up. If you can't have pasta at Eastside Mario's, you're likely going to buy pasta sauce at a grocery store and make your own pasta. So we are working very hard to sustain our operations, along with all of the frontline workers in the grocery store. There's a whole bunch of people behind them, like us, right back to the steel mill, where we buy the raw materials for this product, that are also working very hard to make sure that we have shelf-stable, long-lasting food on the shelves at retail.
All right, thank you, Garnet. Up next is Danielle from McCain's.
Thank you, Sylvain. So yes, Danielle Barran. I'm the president over McCain's Canadian division, and hopefully everyone's familiar with McCain. We're a business that started in 1957 in New Brunswick. We're Canadian owned and still family owned as well. And a great success story. We've grown to $10 billion globally, but still very much rooted in Canada, where our headquarters exist today. We have 7 production facilities in Canada. We employ around 2,400 people. And most importantly, we actually partner with 130 growers across Canada. So in terms of what we've seen, very similar to what Cathy and Garnet have shared, it's been an almost immediate and drastic impact to our business. And our business, like a lot of other processors, is ultimately built to supply Canadians, obviously with food, but also the international market. And looking at potatoes as a crop specifically, over 70% of the potatoes that are grown in Canada for frozen processors like ourselves are actually exported. And so as we think about our industry and industries similar to ours, it's not just the impact of what's going on in Canada, it really is the global nature of this pandemic. And our business, like many others, is very reliant on the food service and the hospitality industry. And so that just dramatic shutdown has had really a knock-on effect across our business and ultimately all the way down to our growers. And so we, like many processors, have had to react, unfortunately, have had to exercise some very temporary layoffs. But the reality is our infrastructure with 7 plants across the country is built to produce large amounts of French fries. 1 in every 4 French fry across the world is a McCain French fry. 7 in 10 in Canada is a McCain French fry. We're very proud of that. But our most immediate concern right now is really the state of agriculture, and most specifically the need that our potato partners have right now. And so as they grow for the year, they harvest for the year, they store for the year, they have found themselves in position with an excess amount of potatoes with a shelf life to it. And so the reality is it's agriculture. It has a shelf life. As the season warms, that product is going to spoil. And so it's a very critical time in our industry for agriculture, for processors, and ultimately for our customers as well, who are looking for a very different new normal as we all navigate out of this.
Danielle, I'm just curious. Can you could you give us a number in terms of this excess you're speaking of, in terms of potatoes, your inventory? So what are they looking like right now?
Yeah, from a McCain perspective, in partnership with our growers. And so ultimately it's the inventory that for the most part, they're sitting on in their storage lots. We project that to be between 300 and 350 million pounds of potatoes. So a lot of potatoes out there that need to be dealt with.
That's incredible. So thank you, all three. So I guess on that note, we all know on Tuesday, Ottawa presented an aid package to help the agri-food sector. Some of that, a part of that package was to deal with these excess in terms of production. I want to get your thoughts on what you heard on Tuesday and whether or not it's actually going to help at all, and what are your expectations in terms of the future coming out of Ottawa during this crisis. So I guess I'll start with Cathy. Get your perspective on what you heard on Tuesday. What was the message of coming from the Prime Minister very reassuring to you?
It certainly was reassuring to have agriculture mentioned in the Prime Minister's comments on Tuesday. Certainly, it's one of our messages that right after healthcare, access to a safe, nutritious, healthy food supply is number 2 on Canadians' minds. One of the things I think that was missing for us, we're looking for a comprehensive package that would address the incredible diversity of agriculture and food production that we have here in Canada. So we actually grow here in Ontario more than 200 commodities, everything from blueberries to zucchinis, chicken, pork, dairy products, hazelnuts. And so the package that was announced on Tuesday was quite targeted, and that was welcome for sure. We had support for beef, pork, dairy and some of that food which is in storage, but there were a lot of gaps for sure in sectors that will not be able to access any funding through what was announced, or it simply won't be enough to address the significant impact that has been felt already in some of those sectors.
The Canadian Federation of Agriculture was on record with its ask of $2.6 billion. Obviously, the package was worth a tenth of that. Was that a concern to you, Cathy?
Yes, for sure. So the package that the Canadian Federation of Agriculture had put forward for consideration was really a three-pronged approach. So one, looking at addressing that issue of labor and the lack of labor that the sector has in order to plant, harvest, process, package, and deliver the food that we need here in Ontario. There was also a big component that was looking to address that loss of the food service market. And we didn't really see much in terms of that announcement that addresses that. And then the third big component for sure is processing. And many of our processors will have tremendous expenses associated with making changes to their packaging and processing and staffing and otherwise in those plants to ensure that the food and the employees and the product is safe all the way through. So to cover those three prongs, we were looking for more like $2.6 billion.
Yeah, okay. I'd like to get Danielle's thoughts on the Tuesday announcement. Anything there to help the potato industry or your situation over at McCain?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot left to be seen. I think, what was communicated as an emergency aid package was communicated as an initial package. And we very much take the Prime Minister at his word that it is an initial package and there'll be more to come. I think what's most concerning really is the immediacy. And I spoke a little bit about the fact that, we have a lot of growers that are just simply sitting on a raw material that's spoiling. And the reality is this situation is almost a double whammy for them. Not only are they dealing with last year's crop, as Cathy spoke to, a lot remains to be seen around the recovery in the food service industry. And so we, like a lot of other industries, have had to cut back on acreage. And this is a key planting time for growers. And so although the package, I would say, is much less than what we were hoping for, I think our emphasis right now is to make sure that the money flows to those growers in need so that ultimately they have the capital to really start up for next year and to maintain the food supply. And so I think it definitely was short of ultimately what's going to be needed, but I think there's still a lot left to be seen in terms of how the mechanics will work on it. And ultimately, how the government will continue to address the growing needs of our producers across Canada.
Okay, thank you. Just before I go to Garnet, just to let you know, we're accepting questions. We're already getting questions, and we're getting a lot of questions. So I'm not sure we're going to get through all of them, but please do submit your questions as soon as you can. And I'll ask these questions to our panelists. Garnet, you're in packaging. You're in the middle of it all. So the crisis obviously is affecting your business. Anything on Tuesday that would be helpful? Do you think that what happened on Tuesday is going to help the food supply chain in Canada overall?
Well, I agree with Danielle's comments in terms of a decent first step, but I'm hoping that it's one of many. When it comes to processing, Cathy mentioned that there are a lot of changes that are needed in the processing in the company's physical locations that are doing the processing. And it's worth noting, food processing factories are very capital intensive. Typically, they're large, they're expensive, they take a long time to build. They have a lot of procedures that take a long time to develop to safely package food. Our facility is no different. We're sitting on tens of millions of assets in very large buildings that take years to construct and are constructed at a certain scale. The speed that Danielle mentioned that is required to help the planters, the farmers, and the front of the agricultural supply chain, there needs to be a lot more urgency around the sustainability upstream. So as we get into the processing, as we get into the packaging, so that the potatoes can get processed and have a home and they don't rot, or the tomatoes that we're hopefully going to have planted and that come off in the fall are going to be able to be packaged into cans and into jars. There are an enormous amount of changes and an enormous amount of capital and resources required to make that happen. And my concern, and Tuesday was a good first step, but my concern is, my perception is that Ottawa, I don't know that they fully understand the complexity of the agricultural sector and the food supply chain very well. There are people in there who understand it very well, but at a very top level, I think we've become very urban-centric and somewhat disconnected from our food supply chain, which you mentioned on the kickoff. We go to the grocery store and we buy a jar of tomatoes. That jar of tomatoes is extremely complicated. It doesn't seem that way when you walk out with it and make tomato sauce, but it is very, very complicated and a very long supply chain from DeFasco's tin mill making steel to, and Danielle mentioned the international aspect of this, a U.S. company making the glass jar, the tomatoes being grown down in Chatham, and in a factory in Mississauga taking all the ingredients and putting them all together. That requires an enormous amount of people, an enormous amount of machinery, and an enormous amount of effort that is very complicated. And I am concerned that Tuesday's announcement didn't reflect the complexity and the speed of the reaction that I was hoping to see.
Okay. We got some questions about food waste and vertical farms. But before we go to those questions, Garnet, I agree with you. And I think, I agree with you in terms of your analysis on processing. And I suspect that both Cathy and Danielle would agree that it doesn't appear to be a priority in Canada to focus and support the processing industry. If you were to do one thing coming out of this crisis, what would you do to help the food processing sector? Just the one thing. Starting with Garnet.
That's not a simple question, but I think that the realization is the first step toward having a dedicated initiative to ensuring that we do have a basic level of food security. And that if that becomes pandemic planning or other crises, we are very much an international business geared for export, but it's very important that we have the ability to have that security in the food supply chain. And frankly, right now, I think we've gotten away from that. If you look at the big beef processing plants, we've got a lack of diversity. We've got an enormous amount of concentration into single facilities. There's just an enormous amount of risk, and it doesn't take a pandemic level shock to set the supply chain off. Unfortunately, that's what we're dealing with now. But I think into the future, we need a concerted effort at a government level to fully understand and have some efforts toward being self-sustainable in that food supply chain.
Thanks, Garnet. Absolutely. If you don't have a strong food processing sector, often the first people to pay for that are farmers. Cathy?
I would add, Sylvain, it's a bit difficult because we're in Canada, and most of us know it snows in the winter and things don't grow very well under the snow. So it's especially important in our geography and for our scale with our population and our land mass that be something that's on the consciousness, on the radar of the government throughout that supply chain, because it's hard to grow tomatoes in February anywhere.
Absolutely. Cathy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that I would say the food processing sector needs, it needed it before and even more so now, is a reason to do business in Ontario and Canada, to make this a really welcome environment to grow and prosper and thrive. That can be through government policy and regulation. It can be through things like taxation and hydro costs, electricity, all of those things that need to be addressed to ensure that this is the best possible place to process and package food here at home.
All right. Danielle?
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree both with Garnet and Cathy. I guess I would add a couple things. One is I think we need a government that can move more quickly. I think one of the positive things that I've seen come out of this from a business perspective is retail customers that have moved very quickly to serve, a drastic increase in consumer needs. I've been very proud of my employees, both sales and operationally, in terms of what we've been able to do to really meet those needs in a very quick basis. And I think the package that came in on Tuesday is a good first step, but we're 6 weeks into this. And I would echo Cathy. I think, we are a Canadian-based global organization, and we're headquartered in Canada. We're committed to Canada. We want to continue to make investments in Canada, and we need to make sure that the government and the taxation system is one that we can continue to be competitive and can continue to be a great export country, which is what our economy is ultimately based on.
So you were expecting a response much sooner from Ottawa to help agri-food, right?
Yeah, I would say we were hoping for one. I do think we can't understate the complexity of this issue. And I think although obviously we represent one sector, there's a multitude of sectors that are in need. And so there is complexity related to that. I think, the federal government has a suite of business risk management tools that they continue to refer back to, but I think they even acknowledge they're not enough and they're too complicated. And so I don't think we can cut short the complexity of the issue, but I think this is a good time for all of us, whether you're in the private sector or the public sector, to really think, how do you move more quickly into the future?
Mm-hmm. So I'll dive into some of the questions that we received from the audience. The first question is about food waste. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk in the media about waste at farm gate. We've heard of milk dumping, some pigs being euthanized, and yesterday we saw a report about chickens being euthanized. Obviously, it's slightly shocking for a lot of people who don't know much about agri-food, but these images, these news is disturbing for Canadians. So I think that's what prompted this question about food waste. What's your ideal scenario when it comes to managing waste throughout the supply chain? Any thoughts on that? Who wants to be first?
Maybe I can jump in
Danielle,
because we're faced with that issue, obviously, right in front of us. I think I'd say a couple things. One is I think a part of the government package was to deal with the surplus food. And so I think that is a great way to try and deal with the excess and get it ultimately into the hands of people that are in need. It's the best thing that we can do. I also think, in the eventuality that we have to deal with the surplus, we need to be considerate of the environmental impact that can have. I'd also encourage us to look at how we can extend help internationally, given the fact that ourselves and a lot of other processors and growers are growing for the export market. We're sitting on, and they are sitting on, inventories that were produced for the export market. And so we need to look at avenues to get the product into the hands of people around the world ultimately.
Mm-hmm. Now, already several farmers groups and McCain as well are already giving to food banks. So you're suggesting we should be doing more when we're in a position of surpluses?
Yeah, I think, I couldn't be more pleased that McCain was able to announce a 20 million pound donation in partnership with Second Harvest and Food Banks of Canada. And we're really pleased about that. We continue to work with them. I think one of the opportunities we have is how do you extend that outside of the zone that we're sitting on. I do think there's a reality of how much excess we have across the entire industry and how much consumption can happen within Canada.
Okay. Cathy, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I would say that in my experience in working directly with farmers as well as food processors over the year, I know that waste is something that is top of mind all the time, looking to minimize waste, maximize profitability, minimize impact on the environment, and all of those things. I think one of the things that we're seeing right now is not so much food waste. I mean, it is being wasted, but the issue is really the inability of our food system to pivot as quickly as is necessary. So you mentioned dairy, and it's one that I learned a lot about too early on in the discussion. So people were calling, why is this happening? I went to the grocery store to buy a bag of milk and there was none, but I heard that dairy farmers were dumping milk. Yeah. Well, overnight, it kind of goes back to that food service discussion that we were talking about previously. So overnight, every movie theater in the country was closed. that meant the butter oil market for processors and before processors are farmers, it was gone overnight. Companies like Tim Hortons, who sell cream in your coffee or other sorts of things, their demand was significantly impacted overnight. So the industry needs time to, both at the farm side and at the processing side, to change. Garnet talked about millions and millions of dollars of equipment and inventory and packaging. You can't just flip a switch and change some of those things overnight. But we have seen over time, people are definitely willing to adjust production on the farm, or they are willing to make changes in the processing plant, but it might require new equipment. It might require new safety standards. It might require new packaging or new tops on the jars, which have to be ordered and delivered. And so I think food waste is what you might see, but really it's the system that has been interrupted so drastically and so quickly.
Mm-hmm. Garnet, you're in the business of extending the shelf life of food products. Thoughts on food waste?
Well, our mission is in fact preserving healthy food, which is what we do. So it's top of mind for us. We're in the business of taking something that rots and making it not rot, but retain its healthy benefits. And the challenge, and Danielle talked about farmers not planting, but you can adjust quickly. You still got a year-long cycle because stuff does not grow overnight, but you can choose not to plant something. The difficulty is that a factory like McCain's in New Brunswick or mine here in Brantford, they're not set up for rapid change. We are geared toward a historical precedent around volumes, around the food service industry, around supply chains. Rapid changes are really hard in steel mills, for example, or in processing plants. We all have a natural capacity. We might be able to crank it up to make more tomato sauce by 10, 15, 20%, but there's a limit. And after that once you hit that limit, you just can't do anything else for 12 to 18 to 24 months until you build a new facility or a new line, and you have to hire and train. So the complexity comes back into the conversation when it comes to how do you fix the food waste. It's difficult to see, but sometimes the only option is going to be there's an excess, there's nowhere to put it, it's rotting, so you're going to have that level of waste at the beginning. If we can get a better handle on the supply chain overall, certainly we can try to build flexibility in. But having a better understanding of the pieces might enable us to react a little bit faster. But frankly, there's not much that you can do about an excess of milk that's spoiling at that point in time. Hopefully, we won't see those images this time next year. I'm hoping that the pandemic doesn't last that long. But the longer tail on this thing, as food service opens, it's not going to open at 100%. The numbers being thrown around are 20, 25% of capacity. There's an enormous number of restaurants that are not going to be able to survive at those numbers. And in the center of aisle grocery is still going to continue to grow because that's where the preserved food is. So people are still going to do that. So those are going to be mid to longer term changes that we have to adapt to. And we will. It'll adapt quickly enough that I'm hoping we won't see the level of waste that we've seen in the very, very short term just recently. Although it is difficult to understand, I do admit, you're right. If you've never thought about the milk supply chain or the tomato supply chain or the French fry supply chain, you really are not going to understand why there's a whole bunch of frozen French fries and there's no milk. It's not a simple thing to get your head around.
Thank you, Garnet. Audience, you can always submit questions if you like. I have a lot already, but we still have some time to go through some of them. Garnet, I want to go back to you for this next one on vertical farms. You did talk earlier about capital requirements for the system, this concept of vertical farms, and you talked about our climate. Do you think it's a viable solution, you think, to make our agri-food sector much more efficient moving forward?
Well, I love the idea. And I like to think that just about anything is possible. I would suggest that is more of an economic question. How much do you want to pay for tomatoes? You really can't get the cost level of modern agriculture out of a vertical farming environment. You can produce food, and you can probably produce a lot of food, but it's definitely going to be more expensive. And I think that goes to a bit of a larger question or larger issue. A lot of the scale of the food processing facilities and companies comes around trying to keep costs down. You can go into a grocery store and buy a 28-ounce can of tomatoes for 99 cents on special. It's hard to comprehend as somebody who makes the cans and the lids, and I mean I can't even begin to tell you how many components go into that to make that at 99 cents. The scale and the volume that you have to have is enormous. So if you go to vertical farming, that's very expensive. It's resource intensive. It's labor intensive. All of those things add cost. So absolutely, I think that we could have a greater presence that would enable us to have more flexibility. You just have to balance that off against what is the cost, what can people afford to pay. And unfortunately, in a circumstance like this, where people's jobs are being impacted, I read in the media report, it was in the New York Times yesterday, I believe, 1 in 5 children in the United States are not being properly nourished right now. That's an enormous number if you think about that. So if you go to vertical farming and say all of a sudden your 99-cent can of tomatoes needs to cost $6, you got to ask yourself, how viable is that? And so I don't have the answer to that, quite honestly, Sylvain.
Okay, thanks, Garnet. Next question is a question directed to Danielle. It's a very specific question. How many potato farmers do you expect this year to go out of business as a result of what's happening?
I think that, obviously that's a very difficult question to answer. I think there's a lot of growers that are in a lot of different positions depending on when they harvested and processed their crop. Ultimately, I think that'll be dependent on the aid package that can help bridge them. It is a really important time right now. They're sitting on excess inventory. They need to recover the cost of that in order to plant for the following year. And so I think, it depends on their individual positions. And I would also say it depends to some degree on sort of what the history's been and I guess specifically to some degree what province they're in. And so you look at, we partner with a lot of growers in Manitoba. This is the 3rd year that they've had a really, really challenging crop situation. And so ultimately, I think we'll see, but I would say we're quite concerned. And we continue to go back to, we need aid for our growers that ultimately feed the economy of Canada, and we need it now.
Mm-hmm. Cathy, from Ontario, how are you evaluating the situation right now, 8 weeks into the crisis with COVID? We talked about, a participant was asking about bankruptcies. Is that a word you're hearing a lot these days in Ontario?
That's definitely something that we hear from a wide range of growers and farmers in the province. Folks that know that they don't have the market to send their product to. So again, going back to that food service thing, there are a number of sectors where a significant portion of the product would go to a food service market. So examples that come to mind would be veal or lamb or asparagus. That's not people certainly enjoy buying those things in the grocery store as well, but they thrive in a hospitality, tourism, food service trade. And many of those farmers think that they are experiencing a challenge in finding new markets for those products. There certainly has been estimates made that this could impact as many as 15% of farmers across the country negatively.
I received a really good question about COVID protocols, hygiene and cleanliness. We've all been to the grocery store and we saw the plexiglass, the mask, teams cleaning carts, cleaning everything really. So at retail, clearly COVID has affected how we operate a grocery store. But I'd like to hear more about your world, how COVID has changed how you operate your business. And do you think that these new protocols will impact food prices eventually? I'd like to start with Garnet.
At the beginning of that, we are, as are many, all food processors have a very high level of hygiene in Ontario. Since we sell only into the food industry, we are a HACCP certified, SQF certified facility, which is safe quality food, which means we have, prior to the pandemic, we maintained the same procedures for hygiene that you would in a factory actually producing food, such as McCain's French fry factory. So we have taken steps, of course. We are running as hard as we can. Our primary concern is the wellness of our employees, because I will tell you that everybody who is able to work from home is working from home, simply so they're not in the facility. Because although it may be important to generate an invoice, you can do that from your home computer. You cannot push the green button on the production line from your home computer. So you have to have people in our facility and in food processing facilities generally. So yes, we have taken steps such as splitting shifts, disinfecting in between shifts, implemented protocols for what happens if someone is exposed or is suspected or has symptoms. We've done all of those things that most people are familiar with, very similar to many businesses that are still operating. But prior to this, we already had a stringent hand washing and sanitizing procedure before you can enter our facility. We already wear personal protective equipment in our facility. So we actually have, and many food processors already had to step up on that as far as maintaining the safety of their people. Will the procedures required impact the cost of food, processed food? Absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind. I don't know what the number is, but it's going to be a material amount. When I look at just to bring people who are working from home back into a physical facility, you need to reconfigure. We are reconfiguring the factory itself. We're reconfiguring the offices. We are going to have more equipment. We're going to have lower productivity rates because of the breaks in between shifts to disinfect. The extra cleaning that goes on takes away from production time. To my mind, absolutely, you're going to see an increase in the cost of retail food over the next X. I'm not sure what X looks like. It'll take a while for these costs to translate through the supply chain. The unknown is going to be the cost of the raw materials, and that's a difficult thing. There may be some offset there as far as agriculture. I'm really not that familiar. I can tell you from a processing and from a retailing perspective, there are significant costs that have to be recouped in order for people to stay viable.
Cathy, of course, in your group, you grow 200 different commodities. All of these commodities have different needs, of course. But what are you hearing from your members in Ontario in terms of cost of production, and eventually it will catch up to consumers? So do you think that there's a factor there created by COVID?
Yeah, I certainly can speak to the increased cost. So farmers are innovators, and they certainly are moving as quickly as they possibly can to make changes in their businesses to protect the health of employees and family members and suppliers that come onto the farm. In some cases, they are changing their equipment to add that same plexiglass that you might see in the grocery stores. They're putting that on planters that are used to put onions or tomatoes in the ground, which will be happening hopefully in May. So lots of equipment modification, lots of changing of protocols, looking at shifting break times, et cetera, having more hand sanitizer and cleaning and sanitation procedures put in place. And I think one of the other big issues will be productivity. People are going to have fewer people in the same place doing the job as normal, which means things won't be as efficient on the farm. One of the real challenges that agriculture always has, no matter what it is they produce, whether it's beef or cucumbers, is to push those additional expenses and costs that the farmer incurs through to the end to the consumer. It is a very challenging situation for sure.
Well, do you think, you guys are price takers, do you think that pressure will resonate across the supply chain, given that we are looking at a global pandemic, given that everyone is exposed to that same phenomena? Do you think there's going to be some quote unquote empathy?
So I think one of the struggles there, for sure, it's a global pandemic. So farmers, no matter what corner of the world they come from, are experiencing the same types of things. But how governments treat and support their farmers is very different. I know, Sylvain, you've written in past about government programs in the United States versus government programs in Canada, and what is the difference there. And so the cost of production for a potato in Ontario is very different than a potato in the United States, and the return to the farmer. So if they are going to the same global markets with product and the government support is really inequitable, that's a big challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to your point, Cathy, each American has given $86 to farmers so far during COVID. In Canada, it's $6. 86, 6. So, Danielle, what do you think? Costs of production.
I would support both Garnet and Cathy's perspectives. I do think we have a very near-term issue that we need to navigate through. We spoke about the surplus issue that people are dealing with from last year, and now there's less acreage being planted. And so I do think that that's an escalating impact that needs to be worked through in the short term. To your question, do I think people are going to have empathy? I don't. I think the reality is, this is a widespread issue. You have a lot of people that are facing unemployment right now that, need to get food onto the table for their families. And so it is a complex issue. I do think, to Garnet's point, the food industry has always been in a good space, I think, primarily around health and safety. And I think there are several, speaking for my facilities, that have pivoted really quickly and have figured out new ways of working. And so I also think there's an opportunity for us to continue to push on not just product innovation, but ultimately process innovation. And how can we be more nimble? How can we be more quick? And how can we be more safe? And so I think there are talks that can come out of this, but they're through government aid, that's going to help materially contain the issue from an economic standpoint.
All right. Thank you, Danielle. We have about 5 minutes left. I got a really neat question about the future. Of course, because of how globalized news are, we can look beyond our borders and look at other models around the world. And you guys have traveled too. And I'm just wondering, looking at the future to try to make things better in Canada, learning from COVID, would there be any models out there you would look into very seriously to try to replicate here in Canada, despite the fact that we have different weather patterns, despite the fact that our fiscal reality is different, our labor force is different? Is there a place where we can learn and try to make things better? A country, a specific sector in particular, things that a benchmark we can use to make things better in Canada coming out of COVID. Any thoughts? I'll start with Danielle.
Yeah, I think it's still very early. We do know that there's a lot of countries in front of us that are sort of starting up again, and we can definitely look to them around what's working and what's not. I guess specifically as I think about the future, and I'll talk a little bit about our customer environment, and Cathy spoke to just the immediate shutdown that we've seen in the food service industry. I also think what we've seen is some resiliency. And so those operators that already have an established delivery and takeout business, really, we're seeing some resiliency there. We're seeing a lot of other establishments really quickly adapt to today's world of takeout and delivery. And so I think there are trends that we don't even need to look at internationally, that we can just look at in this past 6 weeks that likely will continue on, and it'll continue to bring innovation into our sector.
Okay. Garnet, your thoughts?
Well, I'm fairly specific in this segment that we operate in, so I can't speak to countrywide models, but I can speak to a few things that I have witnessed in different geographies internationally that I found interesting, specific circumstances that I thought would be interesting here. Similar climate, although a little warmer. France has their government has been deeply involved in promoting micro farming. local food production and distribution. So they actually have programs to sponsor farms getting started. They have programs to sponsor local markets, and they're fairly generous programs to encourage people to buy local, eat organic. I think that the level of involvement in programs like that make people more aware of the food supply, where it comes from. It gets more people involved in the growing, the production, and as an offshoot to that, that has spawned an industry of food processing that comes from that. So smaller scale food processing rather than giant facilities. And I've been in New Brunswick and seen McCain's facility. It is truly giant. Rather than that level of scale of food production and processing, small factories that are running single lines that are making specific artisanal products for local markets. I think it's a fantastic initiative that I think deserves attention from our government. It's difficult in a country of our size and span and complexity, but I think between a local or provincial initiatives to promote those small scale operations would see a lot more products getting into the market. And if we could at the same time lower the level of bureaucracy in the food production industry, food processing industry, that would be a boon, because the rules and regulations that we have to follow as processors are just they're well intended for public health. They are not particularly conducive to new business development, new facility development, new product development. It's very tough to get started in those things. So I'd like to see the bureaucracy go down and the promotion and investment in local processing and farming go up.
Points well taken, Garnet. Cathy, your thoughts? Any area where we could learn from to make our agri-food systems better in Canada, not just in farming, but overall?
Yep. I actually really like what Garnet just said there. And that's actually a future that I hope we see post-COVID as well, is that we have locally grown food and processed at home, and we can focus on providing food for Canadians and also around the world. I think some of the sectors, for instance, meat processing, we've learned how challenging it is to have all of your processing located in a few very large processing facilities. It's a risk, and I think there are a number of sectors of food processing that have actually disappeared from the landscape here in Canada. Fruit processing, for instance, there is no fruit processing in the entire province of Ontario, and we used to have many processors here that would do peaches and many products. And I hope that we do have an environment here, going back to what I said earlier about attracting and retaining food processing capacity here in our province and in our country, so that we can feed ourselves and be prepared to export excellent product around the world.
Mm-hmm. We have actually we have time for one more question, and I wanted to tackle this old concept of e-commerce, which really has become a priority for consumers. Just this week, our lab published a report on the grocery experience and how many Canadians are actually buying food online regularly. The number of Canadians who are actually buying food online regularly has quadrupled since the start of this pandemic. I'm sure you're not surprised by this. Food delivery apps are becoming more popular. Any thoughts on e-commerce and how that could impact your business or farmers in general? I know farmers, actually, I was in Ontario in February. Some farmers were thinking about e-commerce, connecting with the consumers. Any thoughts there, guys? Danielle, Cathy, Garnet?
Yeah, I think like many other manufacturers, e-commerce has always been on the radar. And I think to your point, we're seeing a drastic scale up as a result of this. And e-commerce has been tough for Canada to crack. We have
why is that? Why is that, Danielle? What are your thoughts on that?
I think part of it is the geography and the reality of our population. And so that being said, I do think this has been a time where there is a new reality, and we are overcoming some of those challenges that in the past have served as a hurdle. It is there's a lot of cost challenges with e-commerce delivery because of the nature of the business, because of our geography. And so ultimately, I think that's what needs to be cracked. I think we've now seen through this that e-commerce can work in Canada. It does provide the convenience that consumers are looking for, and it likely will increase. And so now it's up to the industry to figure out how to get costs out of the system so it can sustain.
Cathy, your thoughts on e-commerce?
Yeah, I would echo that. OFA started to ask our farm membership back in November last year about what were their visions of where their business would go in the future, and did they have a web or internet presence? Did they use e-commerce? It's almost a little bit surprising to think that we were asking those questions back in November, but we were trying to gauge what is the interest there. And we've seen some really good news stories in this COVID-19 experience that a number of farmers have actually exponentially grown their direct-to-consumer sales in all kinds of product lines. And so in order to do that in a safe and efficient way, they are looking at more and more e-commerce as part of that business solution. So maybe they did more cash sales in the past, or farmers market, or a very face-to-face type of business. And now they're looking at, okay, how do I take this business model of direct to consumer and grow it using e-commerce? And we need to tackle some of those things like the logistics of delivery. But it's doable. There's lots of companies that are doing it, and we need to understand how they're doing it and adopt some of those principles and make them affordable.
Do you think it's going to last? Do you think post-COVID, people are going to stick to the web to order food?
Some will, for sure. I was not a big online shopper before this, but now I'm working at home and looking for some ways to support my local farmers and my local community. And I've discovered some suppliers for sure that I know that I will be committed to in the long run. And I know I'm not the only one.
Last words from Garnet on e-commerce.
Really quickly, and interesting, I've got a lot of customers who are processors who sell into retail. And if you'd asked them 6 months ago if they would ever sell direct to consumer, the answer would have been a definitive no. I think you're going to see permanent changes in shortening the supply chain to the consumer, where you're going to have consumers seeking out these companies that are processing and buying directly from them, which has a lot of advantages vis-a-vis cost. It has a lot of advantages vis-a-vis the viability and actually cutting out the retail end of things. I think you're going to see many more companies that were not in e-commerce actively taking an interest in seeing consumer behavior permanently change, like what Cathy said, towards seeking out not just from the single grocery store they always went to, because if you're ordering, you may as well order it from wherever. You're clicking, you're going to order it from the manufacturer, and they're going to ship it directly to your house. And I think that's actually a very positive development in what has been initiated in a negative environment.
Mm. Well, thank you, Garnet. Listen, great conversation. Cathy, Danielle, Garnet, thank you so much for joining us today. Before I hand it over to Bruce, I want to thank you very much, all three of you, and people who are listening to us, who are part of the food industry. Thank you for feeding us. I think what has happened in the last 8 weeks has been nothing short of a miracle. We've seen an industry step up to feed Canadian. It's been great to watch. So thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Over to you, Bruce.
Sylvain, thank you so much for moderating the conversation so expertly and bringing your big picture perspective of how this industry really works. I am taking away both the remarkable complexity of the food supply in this country, and I'm also taking away the resilience and the innovation going on in the sector, so that we not only we remain fed, but we also retain the agriculture and the food supply system as an economic driver in this country. So thank you to all of our panelists. We really appreciate your time and your insight, and to Dr. Sylvain Charlebois for moderating such a great discussion. We will continue this focus on industries that matter economically and matter in our day-to-day life next week, when we focus on the oil and gas sector. Wow, I mean, there have been such extraordinary challenges for that sector over the course of the last 5 years. And with the price of oil being hit so very hard, that discussion is topical. to say the least. A thank you to our audiovisual supplier, Van Valkenburg Communications and livemeeting.ca. And to those of you joining us from your home office, or your office, thank you for taking the time, and we hope to see you again. Have a great rest of your afternoon and stay healthy.